Hi everyone, my name is Liang Fu, or Fu Liang in Chinese way. So we've been having great time not talking about culture, teaching you culture through language. Culture can be so exciting and rewarding as well. So my focus today would be teaching social cultural aspect of the language, or like Kevin introduced yesterday, intercultural competence and knowledge, not in a general language course, but in a course for special purpose. In my case, it's medical Chinese, a new course that I just started offering 2 years ago, and using, of course, authentic data, because today's session is about data collection and how we use it in a language classroom. So my question is, how do you teach culture in your language classroom? My colleagues have done great job showing you how they teach culture, greetings, social norms, and request and refusal, invitation and refusal, and what else? Compliments. So those are all cultural aspects of the language. And they did a wonderful job teaching those aspects in language interaction, through language use. So my question for you is, how do you teach culture in your language classroom? I'll give you 1 minute to just share a little bit of experience of your, of you teaching culture in your classroom. How about I have a couple of you, share your group, the experience of yourself and of your new friends. How do you teach culture in your classroom?
I use a lot of authentic media tools such as dramas. For example, in Korea, there are 6 different levels of authentic, from very polite, very extremely polite, to very casual. So I show them a video clip, like between 2 old people conversation, which is very different from young people who are close to each other.
So you teach them the formal and the informal way of endings. So you are teaching your students cultural aspect of the language, yes, in the context of the language. All right.
If it's not really related to linguistics, but just the cultural aspect, I also use the dramatics. For example, people taking off their shoes before entering home, or people bowing at the teacher before the class starts and when the class ends. And students talk about it, how it's different from their own culture.
Okay, is it intermediate level?
I try to start it very early on.
Very early on.
Beginning of
Okay. Anyone else?
I mean, not so much as a class teaching kind of things, but then like a student need to do some oral presentation practice anyway, so I'll just give a selected topic which student would choose, not like a ninja and sushi, but I'll just give a list of like, okay, here's something like keywords for culture, keywords for like history, keywords for this. You pick one. You have some vague guess and then go here and then you present on that. So that's one way, like they can actually find something they are more interesting, but then it's within the expected things like we want them to figure out.
Before we consider culture just the 5th, not very important skill, waiting to be taught. It's optional. Yes, we're going to touch upon the 4 skills, but the 5th skills, maybe not. And, it's, the last minute thought. It's like the editors decided to throw it into the textbook. Okay, there's something that tagged along. Let's talk a little bit about it. So talk about the culture, and instead of what we just said. So teaching material, we have not very helpful. We need data, language in interaction. We need interactional materials. And even though we have our hands on interactional spoken data, they are mostly scripted, at least based on the research I've done about Chinese spoken data. And a lot of them are scripted and don't reflect culture. So we need a natural spoken data, and that's why we have corpora of various kinds of language, including the Chinese data for my medical course. Now, with the data, my colleague Amara just introduced you. I was able to collect some, about 22 real conversations between doctors and patients. For a 2-year course, it's kind of achievement, because it's not easy for you to get into a doctor's office, sneak in and record their very private conversation and about their problems. So it's not easy, but I managed to collect some of them. I got lucky. And I was able to build a little bit of corpora of spoken Chinese for my medical Chinese course. Last semester, because I got the data, the real conversation data, the summer before, last summer, so I wanted to use some of the data that I collected from the doctor's office to develop some lesson plans for my medical course, because it's a spring course. So I started reading some of the transcripts, listen to them and transcripts, and I noticed something really, really interesting, which is the listener's behavior. I studied about 3 conversations, and 2 of them from the previous years. Doctor-patient conversation conducted by native speakers. They are near spontaneous. I ask my native speaker helpers not to do anything, just look at the scenario and start talking, based on their own experience with the doctor's offices. And then I also got my hand onto one of the transcripts of the conversation that I collected from the doctor's office. So I studied all of them, and I found out that there's something very prominent throughout these 3 transcripts, which is listener's behavior. And then I developed 4 lessons employing all these 3 conversations. I developed 4 lesson plans, which I want my students, by using which, I want my students to explore the listener behavior, the active listenership. While doing that, being able to develop some kind of intercultural competence, and being able to understand why the speakers use some types of response tokens, listener's response, rather than some others, and what's the difference, why the difference. So with this, I went to search. I did some research. I found out that I do have some backup from the research people. This is from a research paper in 2008. And overall, we have 5 types of listener responses. And then some of them at the beginning of the turn, some of them the middle of the turn, and some of the end of the turn. So we're talking about turn taking. When and where we take the floor, also matters in communication. So do you have any problems reading this? Do you have any problem understanding them? So I have some, these are very self-explanatory, but these reaction expressions, and they are expressions, they are words, and they happen they can happen either in the middle of the turn or the end of the turn or the beginning of the turn. So anywhere in the speaker's turn will be fine. And then we have a resumptive openers. It happens only at the beginning of the sentence because, and followed by the complete turn of the next speaker, meaning this person has to wait until the previous speaker finishes his turn to start talking. And before talking, this person would utter these turn-taking, resumptive openers. They are not lexical, they are just vocalic. Yeah, so on and so forth, all right? And then we have back channels. English speakers use a lot of back channels, and if you would agree with me. So with all this information from my observation from the research papers, and I went on to develop my lesson plans. My students, after I send them to do that activity and listen to the recording, and they came up with these about their own language. They use a lot of back channels. And they also use reactive expressions a lot, like this, either at the beginning of the turn or in the middle of the turn, and rarely towards the end of the turn. They didn't see cases of repetitions, collaborative finishes, and reactive openness especially. But it doesn't mean that they don't do that. So that's why I asked them that second question. Do you think this reflects the normal way the English speakers would speak? And they will have a little discussion and come up with the conclusion of their own. So overall, they think they use a lot of back channels and reactive interactions to display their active listenership. And then the next step, make connections. I have them conduct the same conversation the same conversation as the conversation that I ask my native speakers to conduct. So I gave them scenario, and both sets go record their conversation. And I had them compare in class, in my class. So if you look at activity 2, and you will see the transcript of activity 2, and there's a this is a form for you to identify the listener responses in the transcript. The transcript is in page 7. So my students found out all these. Chinese are less likely to utter a response during the other speaker's turn than English speakers. This may be listeners' polite strategy for the sake of saving the patient's face, as it creates less interruption. All right. And my students also said something about relying on eye contact, nodding, or other kind of body language to show your patient, I'm listening, I'm with you, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's the findings that they came up with when we had a discussion. And then next, students are given chance to open up space for discussion of other cultural elements, not just listenership, but also other. So I had them to look at, choice of words and the usage of verbs, and also avoidance of some sensitive words. So my students, had no problem of using problems 4 times in one conversation. No problem saying symptoms, no problem saying sickness. But look at the native speakers. They avoid saying, they use discomfort and even more subtle condition. And the most subtle would be no mention at all. They just say others, all right? And when they did mention 问题, problems, this is no problems. Okay, so after these findings, I have a little discussion among the students, have them, try to make, hypothesis. Why the difference? What do you think of why the difference? The last steps would be students, do another conversation at the same scenario, but with native speakers, and record them, transcribe, write some reflection on their intercultural behavior as a listener, and how it contributes to the success of the communication, just like Mon and Lucidis, and how you guys walk towards each other to have a very successful communication. How did you contribute to this kind of, interactions with the social cultural aspect, kept in your mind? From the conversation that are collected from the real doctor's office, and there are a lot of listeners' responses. My finding, our students' finding, after making comparison and analyzing the listeners' behavior, they found out this. The doctor who has been practicing medicine in America for 20 plus years. Look at what it is. He's more like a Spanish now. Yeah. What do you think of his intercultural competence?
It has adapted to the place where he's practicing medicine.
Can he step back to Chinese culture? Can he step forward to get closer to American culture? Of course. The findings, my students, they reached a conclusion, not me. Doctor's interactions with a high level of interculturality as he maintains his identity while being sensitive to an English speaker's identity. And his active display of understanding as a listener has to do with his social relationship as a doctor with his patient.